and Finance Committee meeting, the last one for 2024. We don't have any apologies, leave of absence. Can I have someone who is willing to move the confirmation of minutes? Councillor Martin seconded Councillor O'Neill. Any questions or comments on that? No. Happy to close. Support that, Councillor Martin. All in favour? Thank you. Any conflicts of interest declarations? We'll just be excusing Councillor Wilkinson for a few minutes. No conflicts of interest. Okay, great. Just go to the agenda for today and looking at the starred items to start with. So I would like to unstar 6.2 just to make an addition which didn't make it before the agenda went to print. And I'm happy to star 6.1, which is the quarterly progress report. Just see if there's anyone. Do you have questions about that? Okay, no problem. So unstarring 6.2, is there any other item that anyone wishes to unstar? No, okay. Oh, yeah? 6.5 starred? Sorry. No, 6.5 is not starred. No, okay. So I'll move that those starred items, 5.1, 6.4 and 7.2 be moved. Seconder? Seconder, Councillor Martin. All in favour? Great, thank you. I'd like to make a procedural motion that we move 6.6 to be our first item, so that our Audit and Risk Chair can come and present right now. So I move that. We've got support for that. Thank you very much. All in favour? Great, thank you. So we'll start with item 6.6, and if we could invite Mr. Ian Roden in. So Mr. Ian Roden, our current and outgoing Chair of Audit and Risk Committee, to provide his annual report. Thank you.
Thank you. Looking around the room, I can see there are a number of councillors that weren't in this chamber at this time last year, so I thought I'd start by just explaining a little bit about what the Audit and Risk Committee does, and then I'll just present some of the key matters which have come up during the year, all of which are covered in the detailed report that you have. At the end, I'm very happy to take questions. So the Audit and Risk Committee is a governance and advisory committee. Our role is to provide advice and support to Council in 7 key areas of governance: financial reporting, internal audit, risk management, external audit, fraud and compliance, internal control, and also oversight of the governance of controlled entities. As Chair of the Audit and Risk Committee for the last 2 years, I prepare a report for this committee annually, summarising the activities of the committee over the last year and highlighting any key issues that I feel you should be aware of. So this year, my report covers a period from 1st of October 2023 through to 3rd of October 2024. Seems like an unusual period, but I've designed it that way to make sure we include the latest audited financial statements for Council. So during that period, this committee comprised 6 members, 4 independents and 2 councillors. And of course, as you're all aware, the composition of the committee has changed since the period covered by this report, with the 2 existing councillors replaced by the Mayor. The committee itself met 7 times during the period, and through those meetings, I believe we covered all of the areas required by our charter. So in considering some of the key matters that I'd like to highlight today, I'll start with some positive observations about areas where Council has made some very strong progress. And the first of those is internal audit. So last year, the Audit and Risk Committee had some significant concerns about the quality and effectiveness of internal audit in Council. The committee last year was unable to recommend the approval of the audit plan for 2023-24. Our concerns at the time essentially emanated from what I'd call a leadership vacuum within internal audit, as well as concerns about the reporting lines for internal audit, which we felt impacted on the independence and objectivity of the important work that internal audit does within Council. I'm very pleased to report that really good progress has been made, and the committee is now comfortable with the quality and the effectiveness of internal audit within Council. And whilst this certainly reflects the quality and the effectiveness of your internal audit team, which is highly professional, I believe credit should also go to Matthew Walker, who's in the back of the room at the moment. Matthew was appointed to the new substantive role of Chief Risk and Audit Officer in February 2024, after a fairly extensive recruitment process. Matthew's leadership and strong communication lines have ensured that internal audit does indeed have a strong voice within Council, and this is achieved through direct access to the CEO and supported by regular communication with me as the chair of the Audit and Risk Committee. Importantly, I think this has given Matthew and the internal audit team the ability to deliver strong, independent advice at a time when it's really needed. The second area I wanted to highlight is risk management. This is an area where Council historically has not been strong at all in the past. But I'm very pleased to say that significant advances have been made over the last 2 years and the last 12 months in particular. And there are some very positive signs of the increasing risk maturity of the organisation. One of which I think was the risk appetite workshop, which I think all councillors participated in a few weeks ago, which looks to have been very productive. So there's still plenty more to be done to get Council's risk management to the level that I would expect for an organisation of this size and complexity. But we've certainly seen some very promising signs of risk management actually being used in practice very effectively. So those are two areas where the committee has been really pleased with the outcome. There were, of course, areas where we were challenged during the year. I'm just going to talk about a couple of those. The rest are covered in my report. The first one is fraud risk management. So those of you who were here in the chamber last year will recall that I highlighted an internal audit report that was issued in August 2023. This report identifies significant weaknesses in the city's execution of many aspects of its fraud and corruption control framework. Unfortunately, as I think all of you know, those weaknesses were exploited during the year, and they were exploited by what we believe to have been a fairly sophisticated overseas operator, which resulted in an uninsured financial loss to Council of almost $2.8 million. That fraud was detected in January 2024. Whilst the city's response once the fraud was detected was generally quite strong, more work remains to be done to ensure that the city builds its fraud resilience along with a strong fraud risk culture. I think this is particularly important in the context of the city's significant transformation programme, but also the external environment where the sophistication of these fraud attacks is increasing at a remarkable rate. The second area I wanted to highlight was financial reporting. This year, there were significant delays in finalising and auditing Council's financial statements. These were initially due for presentation to the Audit and Risk Committee on the 2nd of September, but were ultimately finalised on the 3rd of October. Now, whilst the financial statements did ultimately receive an unqualified audit report from the Queensland Audit Office, a number of accounting issues were identified very late in the process, and this resulted in a number of late adjustments to the draft financial statements. And this is particularly significant because in an organisation of this size and complexity, we always like to have those accounting issues addressed very early on, and usually by June at the latest. And the Queensland Audit Office, in their reports, identified a need to improve the quality and the timeliness of accounting position papers. In closing, I'd just like to refer to the recent changes to the composition of the Audit and Risk Committee, which were agreed to by Council on the 22nd of October. So these changes included the replacement of the 2 existing councillor members of the Audit and Risk Committee. I do believe that the active participation of councillor members in the committee is really important to the effectiveness of this committee. Whilst the independent members that we have on the committee bring particular skill sets and experience, what we often lack is a detailed knowledge of what's actually important to council. And the experience I've had in the 5 years that I've been involved with the Audit Committee is that we've been very well served by the councillor members who've all made very strong contributions. So I would encourage this committee to monitor the effectiveness of these changes to ensure that council continues to have a very robust and effective Audit and Risk Committee during a period of very significant change. Now that's all I was going to refer to, but I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Are there questions for Mr. Roden? Councillor Tozer?
I only say thanks. It's great. I attended the first audit committee that I've attended in a while the other day, and it was just even just for the first couple of hours, it's great to see things moving forward, and thanks for your service.
Thank you, Councillor Tozer.
Any other questions? Well, I'd like to move the recommendation with a 2, which is just being added now. And I wish to express my thanks to you. I learned a lot from you in seeing how you worked as a chair. There was so much to get through, and even identifying what priorities and when for the committee, and looking at that engagement so that it provides the support to us. The buck does stop with us, but that independent source of having people of the calibre of Mr. Ian Roden on that committee certainly gives us a lot of support and strength. So thank you very much. I loved how you chaired, and the contribution that you've made to this city is most appreciated.
Thank you.
So I've just made a second note to confirm that the committee recommends as follows: that the report be noted and that a note of thanks be recorded for Mr. Ian Roden's service as chair. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Martin, lots of seconders for that. All in favour? Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Batson.
Wish you well on your next chairing capacities, wherever they may be.
It'll be in the garden.
Thank you. Into the garden. Oh, well, I like that. So we'll return to our agenda, and we will start with 5. No, we won't. We'll start with 6.1. Did you have a question, Councillor Fowler? Does someone want to report, first of all? Presentation or just question?
Thank you, Chair, and through you. So I just had a question for EGM or General Manager, Trish. There we go. So looking at, I guess, the 3 initiatives on hold, and I guess looking at the whole report, did we expect in the city operational plan, the initiative schedule, progress and spend, did we expect such a small amount of the allocated budget at this stage of the year? So by my read, and please tell me if I'm reading it wrong, but the majority of all the initiatives, like 88%, seem on track, yet we've only spent 20% of the budget. So I just wanted to understand the discrepancy in that, if that's okay.
Thank you, through the chair. Absolutely, progress doesn't always correlate to where we are in delivery of our initiatives. So as a general rule, at this early stage in the first quarter, we wouldn't actually see them being equal. That would get when more initiatives are further in, say, delivery, where major spend might be. So sometimes, depends on the type of initiative it is, but at this stage, it wouldn't be a concern that they're not exactly the same. It's something we just look at.
Very good. Follow-up question.
on a different matter. I just had a question just about the Surfers Paradise revitalisation project and the change that we're actually putting into the operational plan. I note that the change is moving away from the lighting and the creative security upgrades and then replacing that with stage 1 at $10 million. So I just wanted to double check. So the stage 1 of the Surfers Paradise revitalisation project, does that incorporate the lighting and creative security upgrades that we need throughout the precinct? And second to that, the $10 million that's noted, is that the $10 million of stage 1 of the Surfers Paradise revitalisation project, just to get clarity?
Through the chair, absolutely, you're correct. So essentially what we're doing is moving it into the same project. So it's just moving that component of the scope into the same project. So it's just a movement really of a variance of money rather than having 2 separate projects.
And just confirming that's the same budget line item.
There's
for
no
the
new budget
Paradise. Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Fowler, would you like to move that? Seconder? Councillor Taylor? All in favour? Thank you. Now, 6.2, I have one addition which just didn't make it in time. So that is, as on the screen, an allocation for capital works for the Gold Coast Potters Association. Does anyone have any questions about this item? It's just a timing thing. Yeah, love the Gold Coast Potters Association and all the groups that are listed in there. Right, if there are no questions, I'm happy to move that. Seconder? Councillor Gates, yes.
So just so we're clear, though, this is a local area works funded from Division 6, is that right?
Right, yes, that's right. So if you have a look, this is all divisional allocation report, program additions, 6.2.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the report. I just wasn't in the
This
thing,
one didn't get in.
It is funded through Division 6, and it's, yeah, that's it. Yeah, cool.
That's right.
Yeah, great.
Well, I've done the wording that's been guided by officers, but I'm happy to.
With an allocation from Division 6 local area works.
Yeah, let's do that. Of their building with allocation from Division 6. Thank you. Very good. Any questions? Any comments? Councillor Young.
Thanks, Chair. If you don't mind, I'll just address this briefly. One of the projects listed is, the second one is called Local Area Works Division 5, which is for work at Cliffbird Park in Guanaba, which is just a pretty remote park with not much in the way of embellishments, but because of the decision of the CWA at Upper Coomera to prevent future ANZAC services occurring there, which has caused a lot of concern in the local community. There's been a determined effort made, and we're looking to relocate that event to Cliffbird Park, and so we're going to construct a memorial of some sort. That won't be achieved with the money that I've identified here. That's just to do some preliminary works to tidy up the park, put in some landscaping elements. I've met with Mr. Boothman, the member for Theodore, and he's now a member of the current government, and he's very keen on supporting this, and there will be a significant amount of funds coming from the state to council, which will supplement the funds that I've allocated from the division. So there'll be more about this in the future, and I think that will be of interest to Councillor Naomi Fowler in particular, but also Councillor Gates. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you. So we've got a mover. So yes, we're accepting these. Anyone want to speak to it? No, all in favour? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, now we get on to an exciting one. Risk appetite. And it's fair to say I have been looking forward to this recommendation for about 5 years. I think this is a pretty important consideration that the city for the first time has been defining its risk management profile. So we will start with a summary from our legendary risk team. Thank you.
Through you, Chair. Thank you very much for having us. I'm just going to do a quick intro, and then Richie is going to take us through the material, and then we'll both be able to answer questions. So as you heard from Mr. Roden, this is one of the pinnacles of our risk management improvement right here. And this is a product of many constructive conversations which have been led by yourselves. And so thank you very much, Chair and councillors, for your direction and guidance as we develop risk appetite. I think that we aren't going to get it perfect. And we've made lots of compromises to get here, and there's probably a few more to go. But the main message I want to leave with you on that is it's better to start something than not have it. And we can always change our levels. We can always change the descriptions if they're not working. So I'd encourage us to think about getting something in place so that we can start using it. Officers can start referencing it in their material, and council can start using it in their decision making. So Richie, let's go through the deck, and then we'll, and you're happy to ask questions as we go, but also at the end. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Chair. And good afternoon, councillors. It's a pleasure to be here to be talking about risk appetite and risk management. The city is maturing and contemporising our risk management practices for the city. And as Matt said, it is a very important part of our maturity journey. What you see here today is in line with international best practice standards, the Queensland Audit Office maturity framework, and is in line with our organisational plan 2022 to 2027. Risk appetite gives us a common and broad understanding of which risks we're willing to take as an organisation and what opportunities we're willing to pursue to achieve our council plan vision of being inspired by lifestyle and driven by opportunity. It is a key foundational document set by you all that will guide decision making from the top for our organisation. I'd also like to echo what Matthew said as well for the fantastic engagement we've had from Council, our executive leadership team, but also a special mention to our Audit and Risk Committee, who have been instrumental in getting us to where we are today. So today we are seeking your input and your approval to progress to Council for adoption. This is the first ever risk appetite set by the City of Gold Coast. And what is approved here today is a massive step in the right direction to help protect our community and staff, safeguard the city, take the right opportunities, enhance our culture, and make decisions that are consistent with the risk appetite of our elected officials. So how did we get here today? We started with some benchmarking to look at what other organisations did and what good looked like. We engaged a lot of our internal subject matter experts to first, I guess, get some insights into where risk is taken at the moment or not taken to inform some of our statements. We've had a workshop with our executive leadership team. We've then had a council workshop, which was fantastic and extremely productive. We've then taken that back for ELT feedback and specifically some action items and some options that were requested by council for us to bring back. We've had it reviewed through our Audit and Risk Committee yesterday, and brings us to today with a review from the Governance, Administration and Finance Committee. The heart of risk appetite is in these three statements. It is driving where we are willing to take risk or where we are more willing to take or to pursue opportunities. So as you can see here, conservative risk taking, that is, there's more cautious and safe risk taking. So to avoid or limit exposure to risks, even when potential benefits and rewards are higher. You would expect stronger controls in place to manage risk to lower levels. Balanced is seeking to balance risk and reward. So a balance of controls is required to manage risk to moderate levels, to compromise between exploring opportunities whilst minimising risk. Brings us to opportunistic, so to seek out opportunities. Where do we want to see council take a little more risk and be willing to accept that there may be a greater degree of volatility and uncertainty to pursue higher risks and rewards? We started before the council workshop with some draft risk appetite statements. We had 12 risk appetite categories, each with a risk appetite level and a high level statement. After our workshop with council, we had 7 that had no change to a risk level. We had 3 reduced from balanced to conservative. We had 1 increase from conservative to balanced, 1 increase from balanced to opportunistic, and we had 1 brand new category. And I should also say some of the workshopping of the statements before and after the workshop were instrumental in helping us to get where we were today, especially some of the rhetoric and the taking a positive approach to risk management, but also some consistency in the wording allowed us to land those quite nicely. So this is where we landed. I won't go through all of these, but I will call out the key changes. Financial management, we started with balanced and we looked at conservative. That was chiefly because we are looking to take more risk in regards to partnerships and investment. And we think that financial management is key to be more conservative to allow us to take more risks in those areas. That is a specific point that the city administration was asked to come back with some advice. So we'll go through that today as well. Service delivery from balanced to conservative. It was spoken about that service delivery is our bread and butter for the organisation, and we need to be getting that right first and foremost. People and culture from conservative to balanced. I think in line with our organisational culture goals and where we are looking to go as a contemporary organisation, balanced is a more fit for purpose description for people and culture. Partnerships, opportunistic from balanced. It was recognised that the city is willing to take more risk investing in good partnerships to achieve our objectives. We need to be willing to take a little more risk in that space if we wanted to achieve our council plan. Natural environment and heritage. There was this discussion there around natural environment. Well, actually, it started with environment and heritage, and whether that included the built environment as well. So we're proposing some options for consideration on that today. I missed as well, we've moved from community resilience to city resilience, which was a more reflective name of that category, and a brand new category on community inclusion and consultation, which council thought was extremely important when taking risks for the city, that we are considering community inclusion and consultation. So there's lots, I'm sure, still for discussion in this, in our risk appetite work. The 3 areas where the city administration was asked specifically to come back with some options for council to consider were these 3. So what we are putting on the table today are these options with some recommendations associated, and of course open for any discussion on these. The first one was natural versus built environment. So council was seeking clarification on whether the built environment and the natural environment deserved to be in one category or it was dual categories, and what was the best for decision making. So we proposed 3 options there. Essentially have 1 environment category, have 2 categories, or to change the naming of those. So what we are recommending today is option 2 after deliberation from the city administration, and we're hoping to take on the sentiments of council that there are always going to be some healthy tension between the natural environment and the built environment. And to effectively inform decision making, it might make more sense to have 2 categories so we can appropriately express what our risk appetite or risk-taking should be in environment versus the built environment. Financial management, we landed on conservative in the workshop. There was a question around to check with the city administration if this was in fact fit for purpose. Matthew, I don't know if you want to talk about the deliberations at ELT on that one.
Thanks, Richie. We discussed it at length at ELT, and ELT was of the opinion that having a conservative financial position might detract from some opportunity taking in investment. And so they put that back to you to say it might restrict it, meaning you might get a paper that is a great investment opportunity, but because of our conservative view on financial management, might be positioned in a way that detracts you from taking that opportunity. And that's a real phenomena that could exist. Now, part of the challenge there is that we don't know how it's going to play out. And to my point about not being perfect, perhaps this is one where we have to try a level that you are comfortable with and then determine if we are using it effectively and whether it's influencing the right decisions. There's also further work to do about what is the acceptable metrics to measure financial management, i.e., what is the acceptable debt levels that council is willing to hold? What credit rating do we want to target? How much cash reserves do we want? We haven't answered those detailed questions yet, and that is something that we will continue to mature and improve on. And this is a journey. We don't have all the answers today, but I do think we should take your direction on what level you want us to go to, and we work it and review it periodically. So that was the discussion at ALT and just some of that information.
Cool. Thanks, Matthew. And brings us to the last one on community inclusion and consultation. We've drafted some new wording with that in line with our ELT and our Service Gold Coast department, which really brings us to this slide. So this is the heart of where we have landed. 14 categories for review, for your endorsement today to progress to council. So I might even stop it there and just open up to any thoughts, comments, questions, Chair, if that's okay with you.
Questions. Start, Councillor Tozer. Thank you. So
I've got some questions just kind of as I missed the main workshop, but then I had a workshop with Rich and Matthew. And so my questions kind of relate to my views on this. And I wanted to touch on first just the comments you just made about the ELT's view. It seemed inconsistent to me for us to take a conservative position financially and then have opportunistic investment and economic development. And it sounds like what you just said was that the ELT kind of possibly shared that view. Am I reading that correctly?
In a broad sense, yes.
Yeah. Was there any comment from the ELT also about, our most recent kind of departing Chief Financial Officer did a roadshow not too long ago, 6 months ago, in preparation for the last budget, and talked a little bit about the debt levels and how if we're actually serious about delivering the infrastructure that we propose to deliver, we need to take on debt in order to do that. And she used an example of what sort of mortgage we had on a common, like a $750,000 house. And was there any talk at the ELT about whether we're going to reduce or increase our debt levels in order to achieve our ambitious capital plans?
Through the chair, no, that wasn't discussed in detail. And this is the challenge with this particular conversation is we start, as we were talking about yesterday on the risk committee, we start with an idea about how much risk we want to take, and then we construct language to describe it. And right now, that language construct, which is the conservative, balanced, and opportunistic construct, has some different interpretations. Yep. And so ELT didn't discuss any debt management policies, but I would suggest that because financial management is so core to our management, it is the first category where those more robust conversations about those metrics need to occur. Generally, though, if we perceive our current position as conservative, meaning our debt levels are conservative, and we are likely to increase debt,
but kind of
perhaps we are going more to a balanced view. Yeah. That's just applying some logic to the scenario. So if council's view is that we are currently conservative and we are likely to take more debt or reduce our cash reserves, then we perhaps are going towards a more balanced position.
Got it.
So that's for you to consider and give us some guidance on that.
That answers my question. Do you mind if I follow up with some other questions, or how do you want to?
Yeah, I just first, Mr. Walker. The officer on page 59, the officer recommendation is completing and staying with the financial management is conservative. So, and I see that you've created a different, slightly different recommendation for the natural environment as to what we did. So that's not the council decision, the officer recommendation that came back when, given council thinks this, we are recommending that. Can you just elaborate on that?
Correct. And that stems from the facilitator on the day of the workshop, Mr. Simon Runmore, very clearly said risk appetite is set by the board, is set by council. So although ELT might disagree, we are very happy to take council's direction on what the risk appetite should be for the city, because it is set by you. So my personal view as the chief risk officer is that I think we can work with anything. And whatever is decided today, we will start to use it in anger. It'll come in a report and you'll debate it. And perhaps there will be a material disagreement on whether it's within appetite or not. And then some feedback will come to Richie and I and say, Matthew and Richie, it is not working. We need to change this level, or we need to define some metrics. So Councillor and Chair, I think that we're taking direction from Council from the workshop, and that's why that's written that way in the report.
I'll come to you in a minute. Just on that, I think the point is that this is a starting point, not the ending point for the risk profiling. So we are going to work it out. The fact that we don't actually have the criteria of it, if we have a recommendation that comes to council, it can still come to council if it's out of the risk profiling. It'll just define that, and that'll probably help us over the next 2 years work out what we are actually, where we are.
All right. So yeah, with that in mind, I probably don't have the view that is stipulated in the report. I think we, given what I think is agreement across council for building more things and using more cash and potentially drawing down more debt in order to build more community centres and roads, that it makes no sense for us to move from balanced to conservative, which is what it looks like in the report. My second question, or second line of question, is just about the legal and compliance piece. Was there any, obviously ELT includes General Counsel, and my observation just from outside is that we are actually pretty not very conservative when it comes to legals. And the example I'll give is that not too irregularly, we will, as a council, make a decision about a planning matter that is not what the officers recommend, and we take that to court, sometimes win, sometimes lose. And I think that it would be difficult to describe us as conservative when, as a council, we tend to test the Planning and Environment Court pretty regularly. Of our entire legal and compliance piece, how much of it's Planning and Environment Court and how much of it is other matters?
Through the chair, I don't know the answer to that, unfortunately, Councillor.
Okay. All right.
I think it's a pretty big chunk is planning.
My view is a little bit, probably, again, I think we're probably more balanced than conservative when it comes to legal because of our sheer magnitude of our organisation. We actually we test the court a bit sometimes, and we are not, I wouldn't describe us as conservative when we go to court. The next question I have is in relation to...
Make a quick comment on that. Sorry, Councillor Tozer, through the chair. I think with that one, Councillor Tozer, the discussion that we had when we originally were drafting these with our General Counsel was that we've got about 1,300 regulatory obligations across the city that we must comply with. And overarching, do we want a culture of compliance with legislation? And the answer would wholeheartedly be yes. There are certainly exceptions to that where we might push the boundaries a bit on what compliance looks like, but wholeheartedly taking less risk that could lead to a legislative non-compliance was where the discussion, I guess, went, which made it more sense to put it in the conservative space. But again, the decisions at a planning committee, as you mentioned, are wholeheartedly, guiding some of the thinking here. So if it makes more sense to be balanced, that could make sense. But
and I don't think I'm not really proposing for us to break the law or break regulations. But even just today in planning, we decided to adopt some policy or a guideline in relation to election signage on fences because we think it's in the community interest to deviate fractionally from the state legislation in that one. And I think there's actually quite a lot of examples that would lead me to believe we're actually not conservative, we're actually balanced in that. But that answers my question anyway. Yeah. I had another question about the...
Sorry, if I can, just on that one, because I tend to agree with you, Councillor, and I agree with both of you for different reasons. I think the compliance, yes. Work health safety, yes. But I do think, and it's something that I raised in the audit and risk yesterday, that we can be more pragmatic about the legal aspect of that. I mean, there were 3 cases just in that last planning meeting The Southport
chose to deviate.
decision, we went against our own city plan laws. The election one, so. And I suppose the point for today is we don't have to get everything right today, and we will work through these things.
Yeah, of course.
But I do share your concern or question on that. You've got one more question or a few more?
Two more questions, yeah. So one was in relation to the natural environment and heritage, and you've talked about a natural environment and a built environment. So in the papers, the built environment wasn't there, but I note that it's on the thing here. Because built environment didn't kind of exist as a category before, could you just explain how we've fallen on built environment being balanced? Because it's a new category that wasn't in the report.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to take that one. Through the chair. Councillor Tozer, the direction from council on the day was to consider, and we thought rather than bring to you options that just that may land today and we will have a new one, we thought we would propose what that could look like.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be the option that is chosen today, but we thought we'd at least put it in there. In terms of the process to guide the input, we took some things out from the natural environment category that we thought made more sense for built environment, and we worked with our city plan and planning and regulation department to draft some of that content for approval at ELT.
Okay, cool. That answers my question. I think balance is pretty good for that, but it helps me understand where you come from. From a natural environment point of view, particularly in light of the nature-based tourism project we're embarking on, to set our risk appetite at conservative for environment, I think seems a little inconsistent with that key project that we've kind of adopted as a team, and we're moving in that direction. In January next year, we're going to come out and talk about nature-based tourism, and the idea that we're conservative in there would kind of maybe imply that we shouldn't explore our natural environment for tourism, because there is clearly risks and then mitigating risks that go into nature-based tourism. So I'd probably be inclined to. Did anyone from the ELT kind of talk about that in the context of that big project?
Through the chair, yes, it was discussed. It has a similar tension to investment and financial management.
Yeah.
And on the day at ELT, there was general agreement that we could work with an opportunistic investment category, which nature-based tourism is an opportunity in the investment space, with a conservative environment space, and hold those two things in tension. So that was what ELT discussed.
Yeah, I'm not sure I share that view. The last thing I was going to ask, the last question, a line of questioning I had, was about reputation, and it looks like we've come up with balance there. Our mission statement, or the statement that's on the wall in my office and on the TVs, is inspired by lifestyle, driven by opportunity. Like, I'm thinking, how do we reconcile balance for reputation when our whole mission statement actually says driven by opportunity? Why isn't it opportunistic? Was there any feedback from them about that? Because we're not really driven by balance. We're driven by opportunity.
Through the chair, excellent point.
To be fair, it did not come up in the workshop. It was looking at conservative to balanced and why not conservative.
Why?
And from my memory, it wasn't a conversation of whether, like, the reputation, it's a reputation of this council, like, how much risk are we willing to take to our reputation?
Okay.
So the idea is we will take some risk.
I think we take heaps of risks. In fact, our mayor regularly uses the word have a go spirit. And, you know, whilst we're in that frame, whilst we're in that context, I think it'll be difficult for us to say that our reputation is anything other than opportunistic. But
Well, through the chair, another point on that.
So I suppose it is, what is it and what is our target?
I wasn't sure if it came up. My question was, did it come up? It sounds like maybe it didn't come up. I think,
no,
you know, I think it's worth. That's the contribution I've made today.
Okay, thank you. Very much appreciated. And contribution and questions like someone who has just completed a master's in this stuff. Councillor Young? I mean,
I had a question about the recommendation, the wording of the recommendation. Number 2 says the council adopts the recommendations from the options for decision, and then it says natural versus environment. Should there be natural versus built environment? Just for clarity.
Through the chair, Councillor Young, that is correct. It is incorrectly worded.
Okay. Thanks, Chair.
Young. Other questions? Councillor Martin?
Thank you, Chair. And if I could just talk to Councillor Tozer's point about the reputation. I reckon on the day when we had the workshop, it had to do with, we were discussing community inclusion and consultation, and now that's a new category. Perhaps reputation got tied into that, but now we've got that extra category. I think it's an excellent point. My question's on financial management, and we talked about when we think about environment, if we were too conservative, it might be do nothing. What are the risks if we move financial management from conservative to balanced? What are the increased risks? What are some of the things, I suppose, that we'd have to be comfortable with in the financial space with moving that profile?
Through the chair, if we reflect on previous decisions that have been put before council, we need to have more rigor in how those things affect our long-term financial outlook, i.e. sustainability. So the Queensland Audit Office has 6 financial sustainability measures, and those measures have different targets that the Queensland Audit Office recommend councils adopt. And so those 6 I would be very focused on, because that's what the Queensland Audit Office is focused on for financial sustainability for local government. And they encompass things that you would generally expect: asset renewal levels, your operating surplus ratio, et cetera, et cetera. So that is where we should start.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you. And just following on from that, just obviously it's noted in the report, and we did talk about it in the discussion around the CFO. We've obviously our CFO is departing us, so that was a note. I wondered if ELT shared the same view around support, how it got to supporting conservative, or was there any further thought around perhaps the depth of our financial structures that, you know, is that a risk shared by ELT, a change in CFO for the administration?
To you,
yes,
Susan, please.
Yes, we did have a discussion around that. The view was that we're very confident we'll be able to replace the CFPO with a very qualified person. In fact, we received, I think, 90 applicants from right across Australia for that role. So we didn't share that same view. We did have a conversation around, as Matthew mentioned, around financial management. And I always say that the key to determining whether, you know, it's conservative, balanced, etc., is what we write in the points around where we have no appetite or where we have some appetite. And based on what's there, I would say that it's probably we're leaning more towards the balanced approach in terms of, you know, we have an appetite for increasing debt to invest, good debt, to invest in strategic opportunities, etc.
Just before we take any more questions, I'm clear now that I would be comfortable moving a changed recommendation, which would be 2B financial management option 2, which would move it from conservative to balanced. I was a champion of the conservative approach in workshop, and my concerns there were less to the fundamentals of what you'd consider in definitions of financial management, debt to equity ratio and the like, and more about the immediate concerns that were coming up about our financial reporting. So that's where, so I think we can meet it in option 2. So, and we go to balance there. So that's just a proposal for the committee to consider. Councillor Taylor?
Thank you. And I suppose my question was talking about going from conservative balance with financial, because financial would much really play in every category, and then it would be a conflict against one of the other categories. So, you know, investment opportunities, if we're conservative, would we have a view because we're optimistic that the financial, even though we're sitting at conservative, would that hit the top end of that conservative balance? Because there's areas there that I know there's a risk there, so you would want to have less financial risk. But obviously where we do want to be more optimistic, we don't want to miss those opportunities. Because so where would that valuation be played with opportunities.
Through the chair, this comes down to how the report is positioned by the author. And this is where, being honest, our officers are not very practiced in writing to you using the risk appetite language. This is outside of appetite, counselors. However, I recommend that we proceed anyway because the upsides outweigh the downsides. And so our officers are going to have a learning curve, and it's an education piece for us in the next steps to educate them on how to use it properly. So I think, to answer your question, counselor, is that it depends, and the author is the one who paints the picture for you to decide.
Councillor Fowler?
Thank you, Chair. And through you, I actually support surprising option 1. The reason being is we're starting somewhere. Yes, it can be reviewed. It's annually reviewed and it's ongoing. We are about to embark on a new journey with Invest GC, and I think us going out with a mindset that we are conservative in our financial management does set the lens so that we don't, without mentioning any investment deals, that we don't receive any investment deals that we don't want to. I feel like it does set the tone for just a starting point. Whether that's reviewed in 12 months or ongoing, I would feel more comfortable with a conservative financial management risk profile.
I think, and perhaps Mr. Walker can speak to this, but I'm not sure whether this would be considered by Invest GC, because they are effectively in the opportunistic column already.
Sorry, can I clarify? I'm probably confused. No, what I mean is when we're setting just even at council level in terms of how we're considering things, like surely our risk profile, they would be able to understand that and know that. I would understand, even though they are a separate entity.
Well, what they would be looking to and referring to, I would think, is the investment and economic development profile. The investment profile being opportunistic. That will be where they will look to. And Councillor Gates.
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to say, I think I recall that this did get some time at the workshop, and I'm a little uncomfortable changing it, given we did the workshop to take in all the commentary from the various people who attended, and I think I remember Councillor Doran had a view on this, so maybe if we could leave it at option 1 for today, and you could perhaps raise it at full council to when everyone's there to see if there's an appetite to change that.
Yeah, and I'm pretty agnostic about it, and I don't think whether we have that as 1 or 2 is going to alter in any way what comes to council. It will alter the filter that it's presented to us through. This is considered out of scope, but we're recommending it because of these reasons. But it doesn't necessarily mean a distinct change in our decision making. So I think that's okay, and I appreciate that, and I do think some consistency with the workshop. The workshop did request, though, for feedback on those 2 points. And yes, possibly it is best to go with the officer's recommendations on those 2 points. Councillor Taylor?
Thank you. And I just want to clarify, I know we're mentioning Invest Gold Coast, but my understanding is that will still come back to a council paper that would still have some consideration to the council financial position as well. So am I clear in say Invest Gold Coast, as much as they will look at investment opportunities, when it comes back to full council, it would still consider our position. And at the moment, if we're saying we're going to sit at conservative, obviously we would hope we'd be looking at the top end of conservative if we've got an opportunity there.
Through the chair, my view on Invest Gold Coast is I'm trying to simplify the company construct. Council will allocate funding to them. That allocation is done within council's risk appetite of opportunistic. And then Invest Gold Coast will operate and bring things back from within that envelope. So my general view is council will do a deliberation about how much funding is allocated, and that allocation will be within your appetite because you will deliberate and decide. And then they operate. And then risk appetite doesn't apply to their operation, though. They're their own company with their own charter and constitution and their own appetite. And most importantly, the investment policy itself. So that's how I kind of see how that operating.
Do we have any other questions before we get into debate? No other questions. Okay, well, I will move the officer's recommendation. Councillor Martin will second it. Risk profiling, well, first of all, for a personal background, risk profiling has been my work for 25 years prior to getting into this job. And I'm well aware that we are at the start of this process and not at the end. And what Mr. Walker said, it is a language, it's a conversation, it's going to be a new way of our officers writing to us. There's going to be a new way that we consider things, and it'll become very comfortable with us. Oh, this is within that risk profile, this one isn't, but we're happy to consider it because of these risks. We're going to have a greater understanding of risks. So I'm very excited that we are getting a risk profile system and the work that's been put into this by Richard and his team. It isn't right now. It's not wrong, but it's not right. This thing is going to be a work in progress. So I'm very grateful for the work that was done by the officers to this position, and also surprisingly, I think we all surprised ourselves in that workshop how we did come to alignment. It was noted in the Audit and Risk Committee meeting yesterday. They really valued the changes that were made, not because of what they thought of our changes, but they recognised that they're interested in process, right? Audit and risk guys. They saw that there was buy-in, and they saw that there was it was real for everybody involved. It was authentic. So, yeah, I think we're on the start of a good process here, and it's going to serve not only our council but councillors going forward. And we will be back here, no doubt, to tangle on the risk profiling as we get it. And even getting to the stage of knowing, well, what does that actually mean for us? What debt levels does that mean? Which will be the next stage. Anyone wish to speak against? Councillor Tozer?
Thank you. Whilst I'm not on the committee, so I can't vote with or without for or against this motion, I think what we've come up with is inconsistent with our balance sheet and with our 4-year capital works project, and also with our 10-year capital works program. It's not actually about Invest Gold Coast. It's actually about the community centres and the roads and the sporting fields and the libraries and the community services and facilities review. It's the projects that are captured in that that I'm sure, I'm very confident our risk appetite here is inconsistent with. And I'll start with financial management. You know, when the former CFO came and talked to us, she explained that we had something like a $45,000 mortgage on a $750,000 house, and that's a very conservative position. But in order for us to actually deliver the program of work that we'd planned to deliver, we just can't. We can't keep holding our debt levels at where they're at and our cash levels at where they're at to be able to do all the things we want to do. And frankly, without adjusting our risk profile to accommodate that, we're actually like hypocritical. We're not doing the right thing. We've already adopted a 4-year capital works budget in the last budget. We've also all had a chance to review the 10-year capital works program. We all know the projects that we can and can't, and we aspire to deliver. And the financial management needs to be at least that balanced for us to be able to achieve the goals we've actually set as a council. The second category is legal and compliance. I think the reality is that the size of our organisation enables us to be balanced when it comes to this. We're not conservative when it comes to legal. We spend a not insignificant budget in the Planning and Environment Court. We set aside a budget each year to do that. We do that because we want to defend the community interest, and sometimes the community interest is actually at odds with the planning legislation, and so we're required to have a balanced view when it comes to legal and compliance to make sure that we're actually adopting an approach in court that defends that community interest that sometimes doesn't line up with what either the city plan or the state planning legislation says. I'd also say that from a compliance point of view, we actually don't want to be over-regulatory. We know that the state government, like even just recently we talked about verge parking, where we consciously took an education position instead of a regulatory position on where people should park their cars, even though the Torum Act is unequivocal about where you can and can't park your car. That's just one of many examples. The other example earlier today was in the regulation thing was about the election signage. We took a different position, and we do that because we think it's in the community interest. So for me, legal and compliance has to be a balance, because conservative is not where we're at. We just don't choose to always comply with the law. The third is reputation. I think it is ironic that our inspired by lifestyle, driven by opportunity is our motto, and we've decided that our reputation should be balanced, because I just think that, we are driven by opportunity. We have, a mayor and a council that regularly talk about this idea of a have-a-go spirit, entrepreneurism. We've got a legacy of, development and these things where risks are taken in our city, and I think it is silly for us to say we're balanced when we're actually not. We're not balanced. We are opportunistic. That's what we're all about. That's what people come to the Gold Coast for. They come for an opportunity. And the final is the natural environment. I have probably one of the more conservative views, when it comes to environment in the political spectrum in Queensland. So I think my personal views are probably quite conservative, but I think as a council, we've made a decision that I haven't always agreed with about nature-based tourism, and that is going to impact the environment profoundly. And frankly, I think the natural environment it says in the report here that we've moved from balanced to conservative. I think that sends a wrong message to the market. We're not becoming more conservative when it comes to the environment. We're becoming as conservative as we have been, and we're inviting expressions of interest when it comes to nature-based tourism. And so I think it is, again, inconsistent with our stated objectives for us to go from balanced to conservative, and we should move that back to balanced. They're my four, they're my four segments that I think we've pitched wrong on. But I'm happy to stand up in full council and say the same again, and see if those amendments can be made.
Thank you. Councillor Young.
Thanks, Chair. I really value your input and that of Councillor Tozer to the discussion today. Like Councillor Tozer, I can't vote, but I just wanted to offer a couple of words about the position on the natural versus built environment. The recommended option was to split the two, and I thoroughly endorse that. I think at Planning and Regulation Committee this morning, we had a briefing about the engagement that's occurred to date with the community, the broader community, about the construction of the new planning scheme and the preliminary elements of that, and what the community's feedback was. And it was very strongly evident that the environment is a significant matter to the whole community. So I think it's important that we have isolated those two, and that we can deal with them as distinct creatures, shall we say. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. Look, I would just want to make a point that we have this now, and it's a starting point, and obviously it's going to give officers the ability, and I know there's going to be a lot of education there to bring reports and us understand it. I suppose until it's actually implemented, that's when we'll get a real understanding of how it's working, whether it's office level or us making decision makers. I feel that a starting point's better than nothing. We could debate all these categories for a long period of time. I acknowledge, Councillor Tozer, that I think as a city we are more balanced moving forward. But I think as a starting point, I'm happy to endorse what we've got here now. And hopefully as we move forward, we learn from it and we can move fairly quickly to adjust it accordingly as we move forward. So I'm happy to support it.
Thank you. Any speakers against? I'll close. I found myself nodding in furious agreement with Councillor Tozer, and there is nothing, Councillor Tozer, that you said that I disagree with. But I think that the purpose of today is for us to set a new system of risk profiling. And I think what really struck me when Councillor Tozer was speaking is us implementing this is going to change the conversation in our decision making, and it's going to change the conversation in decision making for council officers, because the conversation that will be in is, okay, where are we with our risk profiling? Where does this fit with our risk sense? And so I welcome that, and I welcome this kind of dialogue that is going to occur more often in our decision making. I have to, again, I am so excited about this. I really think that this is a real step of maturity for our organisation, that we have a risk management process, one that we have all bought into, and you can see by the conversations today that it is real for people. It's not just a statement that's going to be stuck somewhere. It will create tension in our meetings, and that's perfect, and that's what it's about. Richie, I know this has been your other baby for a while, and we're delighted to get it through. So with that, I will ask for a vote. All in favour? Thank you very much. That is a unanimous vote for that. Thank you, gents.
Thank you, Chair.
See where we go with this.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, the next one is 6.5. I really just had a comment that I wished to make on this before recommendation, but are there any specific questions? Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chair. Just in regards to the community leasing policy, so I'm conscious that we're actually undergoing a review of community leasing currently, and I'm wondering if this policy renewal is perhaps a bit premature. If it's not, I've got about 7 questions. Sorry, Chair.
I think it's a great question, and the reason why I wanted to speak to this is because we've had so much trouble. And if I may speak first, and then I'll hand it over. We've had so much trouble with changing our policies. What's been done with these policies is effectively just a shift of it into the new language without changing much in intent. And then once we've done all that work, then there's going to be another review of the leasing policy. But I'll hand it over.
Thank you. Through the Chair, that's absolutely correct. So the way that we've approached this particular policy is in a 2-part review. This first part of the review is actually not changing any of the intent or the policy rules, so to speak, in acknowledgement that there are 2 significant reviews underway across the city. One is the actual community leasing framework, and the other is the review of our community services and facilities. And once those 2 reviews are done, then we'll absolutely be bringing back a second version of this policy probably halfway through next year.
Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chair. If that's the case, can I just go through some questions I have?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So I note in point 14 in the new policy, it states that the leasee will maintain all improvements within the leased area at the leasee's cost. So I guess that's a point just to highlight with the review that's going on, that's perhaps an area, if council has the mind to change those responsibilities, that wouldn't be relevant. And I also just wanted the question, is the policy intent now to be inclusive of government and community organisations that are for-profit? I'm conscious that the eligibility in the previous policy was not-for-profit status, yet this seems to be omitted in the new version.
Through the Chair. No, it's in relation to the definition of community organisation in the Local Government Act, which refers to not-for-profit.
Okay, well, it's just not worded not-for-profit. That's just a point. And also I'll run through these quickly because you've probably got quick answers. But I also note the requirement for a completed development and licence application for erecting advertising signs is not included anymore. So I was just curious how that process will be managed if it's not included in the new policy.
Yeah. So that particular condition forms part of our standard T's and C's in our lease agreements. So we have the staff have actually gone through the existing lease agreements or examples of existing lease agreements to confirm that that's the case.
And thank you through you, Chair. While I note there's an increase in rental fees for non-licensed clubs and organisations, I also see there's office accommodation fees, specific rental fees for office accommodation within community centres and major sporting venues. Is this just due to the fact that we didn't include community centres and major sporting venues in the policy previous?
Correct.
And did we always charge those amounts at that value?
Absolutely. So this is actually just picking up the way that we actually currently operate. Those fees weren't actually included in the previous version of the policy, which hadn't been reviewed for some 16 years. So we took this opportunity to actually pick up the way that we operate today. And any of those fees can actually, if you want to consider those as part of those other strategic reviews, can be looked at as well.
Thank you. And just two other quick ones, if I may, Chair. When we state in the new policy that offers for renewal are not offered, can we please discuss this point and confirm, is this a new change, and if so, why?
Through the Chair, it's not a change to the existing way that we operate. Sorry, can I just get you to refer to the actual section of the...
So 6C. Options to renew are not offered.
Options to
99,
renew.
sorry, the communications policy.
Options to review. Can I take that question on notice and come back to you on that one?
Sure. I thought I might be incorrect, but I did think that we did actually do have options to renew for our leasees. So in that it states that we are not offering any options to renew. And I'm sorry, one more, and then I'll zip through you, Chair. And can I also please ask what officers will be asking groups to demonstrate in terms of organisational viability, and what this will be defined as? So what will groups be required to provide to council?
There is a definition included in the policy which relates to being able to retain status as a community organisation, including financial sustainability. So generally they would be asked to provide financial statements and evidence of their governance structures as part of their organisation structure.
Okay, so that's basically your profit and loss, your financials, showing that you're financially viable.
Correct.
And then that you're, from a governance perspective, structured correctly from an organisational perspective.
Yeah, that you're a registered association, etc.
Thank you. I was just concerned we were adding burden onto an already burdened volunteer base, but that sounds simple to provide.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just on that one on 6C, if there's an officer in the back who is able to answer that now, that would be useful, but if not, we'll take it on notice. That would be interesting if that has changed.
Yeah, I'm happy to come back.
Councillor Gates.
Of the meeting.
Thanks, Chair. Just with regard to the telecommunication leasing policy, the very first point says a lease over an area of council land or controlled land to accommodate a new high-impact tower will only be granted to a telecommunication carrier or infrastructure provider after a development permit is issued. Could we add prior to after, if we could say after consultation with the divisional councillor and after a development permit is issued? I've had instances where where council has provided approval for a structure on top of a water tank, for example, without my knowledge, and it may be fine, but I would just like to be sure that we're ahead of the game in understanding that might be going to happen so that we can communicate it to our communities. And I also wondered if there would be an appetite, which I'm hoping there will be, to add the Adventure Parkland Coomera to the list of locations where leases will not be considered. It's the only big area of parkland in Division 3, and it's been designed. It's a huge parcel of land with a lot of environmental land that's being kept to the rear of the site with walking trails and the like. And I would, rather than us have to review this policy in a year's time when that's being constructed, I'd be grateful if consideration could be given to adding it at this point in time. It's on Kirkham Road South. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Gates, could you just state the wording that you thought would like to be added?
Well, an E, that the telecommunication leasing policy be amended to... is someone typing it? Sorry. Okay.
Because you're going to deal with number 1, which is about the lease. So the lease follows the DA. You want to have advice before a DA is even lodged, surely, to give consent for the telecommunications provider to be able to lodge a DA, an application.
Well, I thought it was safe because it says the lease will only be granted after, and what I'm saying, that the lease won't be granted before consultation with a divisional councillor, and it's safe. Because this says a lease over an area of council-owned or controlled land to accommodate a new high-impact tower will only be granted after consultation with the divisional councillor and after a development permit is issued. So the lease comes after that consultation.
I know there's still questions, but I don't feel comfortable with that because I think it suggests that we have power that we just don't. So I've had one of these in my area. If it goes to me for consultation, it looks like we actually have some influence and capability, and we don't. The federal are just going to rule over us. I'd prefer to say, sorry, not our bag, because we've got no say about where the federal guys decide to put these things. So my preference would be to leave it out for that reason, because it makes us look like we've got power or authority, and we really don't. And so
I totally understand that we don't have jurisdiction and that it's an essential service, but I would always choose to be informed on behalf of my community because I represent them. So I feel quite differently. I'm more than brave enough to say to them, we can't change it, but I can warn you that it's going to happen. Anyway, I'm not
I get the informing. I think the suggesting it before the DA sounds like we can influence that, and I don't. Anyway, let's get back to questions.
Well, actually, there have been instances where we have impacted before your time, where there were new regulations brought in about the distance that a tower could be, for example, from a bedroom, because there's one on a parcel of land at Kingsholm where people look out of their bedroom window onto a tower. So we were able to have an influence over the development application. So I feel differently, but I respect your right to...
No, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, the current process, I'm sorry, there's 2 steps. The first is the divisional councillor is approached about the intention for a company to lodge or to be granted the permission to lodge an application. That in itself is seen by the community as, gee, you've just done it, you've given them the window, but at least we get the opportunity to provide some input to that.
Right.
I don't know if we can veto it entirely, but I think the current process is we certainly are approached first and we get the opportunity to say, I support that, or I raise these concerns that should be addressed by the applicant.
Okay, thank you.
That's the point. And I think Vanessa wanted to contribute to, if you can.
Thank you. Happy to, through the chair. That's absolutely correct. There's a 2-part process in relation to the telecommunications. So the first is obviously they come to the city to ask if they can actually put a tower or other infrastructure on our land, and they come and ask us whether or not we would actually support the leasing of that land. The second is in relation to, and that is given without any indication of how a development permit might actually be issued. The second process is they actually still have to follow the development application permit process and meet all of the requirements under that. At the initial stage where they come to us and ask for our support or whether or not we would consider a lease on our land, councillors are engaged in that process, and we've built those requirements into our delegations policy so that anything that happens in your division does require consultation with the divisional councillor.
And thank you. And that's the point I'm making, Councillor Patterson, only on council infrastructure, because we do have the ability to represent our community on those occasions. And so that was why I simply wanted it in the policy so that it's part of the process. I respect that it's already in your procedures, but...
It's actually within the delegation policy, which was adopted by Council in November last year, and that applies to anything really that happens in your division and the need to keep you consulted.
So we don't need it because it's already there. But if I could just put an E in, that the Adventure Parkland Coomera be added to the sites where telecommunication facilities will not be supported. Thank you very much.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. Mine just relates to this point number 6 in the policy as well. Leases for telecommunication facilities will not be supported in the following parkland locations. Can you just help me understand in this regard? I can appreciate why we would exclude them, but how did we come up with these particular parklands? For instance, Greenheart, it's 257 hectares from memory, and and I'm just mindful that, you know, if we're going to have a large number of sporting access, you know, potential events and things like that, how did we come up with that being excluded when it potentially might, like, have we gone to site and tested it for its accessibility to telecommunications already on site? Like, are we trying to preclude something that we don't necessarily have the data to say that it would actually be a hindrance by not having telecommunications in that location? Can you just give me a bit of an idea on how we came up with this list to start with, and I guess how we've assessed that to make sure that we're not, for instance, in the future, crippling ourselves? And I use just Greenheart because it's just the top one. But if there are concerts, given that it's so close to Seabus Stadium, I, as a younger gentleman, used to go to a lot of festivals at those. and at times when I went to those larger scaled events, I wouldn't be able to phone up my ride or how I was getting home, and that for me was a pathway safety wise to actually get to where I needed to go. Now I'm just trying to be mindful for instances like that. Are we actually precluding ourselves by adding them to this list for not giving it consideration in the future for those particular, I guess, possibilities? So if you can help me clarify just how we got to that list and how that works and what we use to get that, that would be fantastic.
Through the Chair, my understanding is that list was guided by council themselves and primarily based on things like amenity and proximity to public space and visibility of these types of infrastructures across the city. That's the advice that I've been given in relation to where the list originated from.
That's news to me. I think if we can have one up on near Sun Valley Park, I think there's enough room at Greenheart. Follow-up question.
Policy.
Thank you, Chair. And I don't know how to best then articulate this if that's just the case that we made a decision because that's what we wanted without necessarily looking at other capacities like what I've just mentioned. I don't know if there's some takeaway that we can get city officers to report back perhaps on what the coverage of those particular locations are now and whether or not they should be considered at a future time for that particular coverage, should it actually be something that I think is part of our safety for our city and all those kind of directional principles that we have, whether or not that should be factored into these particular locations. I'm just being mindful of those kind of future emerging needs that may be hindered by actually just having them located on this list when really they would actually be adding a benefit to those areas. And I've seen the towers that are hidden in palm trees, which are very well hidden, whether those types of future considerations about the character or the disguise of those infrastructure pieces could be considered. So just food for thought, but I don't know how to best, is that something you can take on notice to report back? I just think that we need to look at that rather than just picking things out of the air and going, well, let's just add that.
Through the chair, thank you. If that's what council wants to consider, is those provisions or exclusions that are listed in the policy again, which were brought over from the existing way that we operate. If you wanted to take a more strategic look at that, then I would suggest that we do bring back a report, probably without restricting. This is Chris's area. I would say 6 months. Is that sufficient to have a look at that more strategically?
Yeah, so just so that I'm clear, page 125, this is all in the existing policy, right? And we're just moving it over. You're not adding anything new, right?
Other than what's been put on the floor today in terms of the adventure
Yeah. So with this, can you remind me when this one was last reviewed?
Through the chair, 2022. The telecommunications.
2022. Sounds like. Councillor Young?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, just on that issue of the list of parks, I was going to ask also how it was created, and I was going to suggest that we might add Country Paradise Parklands to it, and then I realised we're actually spending public money to install Wi-Fi in that park, so it's contradictory. But I wondered if there's a desire to include a reference to prohibiting telecommunications facilities within a certain proximity of homes. Like it's on our land, but there'll be homes nearby. There's nothing in the list there. We say we don't want it within 20 metres of play spaces or structures, formal active recreation areas, sports playing surfaces, and formal seating areas, but we don't say anything about a house. And I would argue that it's probably desirable.
So I've got a question. The way that you're doing the brief review for the facilities one, the community one, and then you're coming back after the review, are you intending on coming back again with this one? The telecommunications one?
Through the chair, no, that wasn't the intention initially, but following the conversation here today, that might be an option to either not accept the policy changes at this point and request a further review strategically around your telecommunications, or accept the review based on it literally brings forward the way that we operate today, and then request a subsequent review be brought back at a later time period of 6 months at least.
Sorry, Councillor O'Neill.
Just through the chair to Councillor Young. Councillor Young, I think from memory, the the telecommunications tower have their own set of criteria as to how close they can be to residents and things like that. Because I know we had one in Currumbin Valley, and their criteria was quite strict as to the distance, measured from here, there, and everywhere. So I don't know that would help us putting something in there.
I think theirs goes on strength of the signal. So, for example, I've got 3 applications current at the moment, and one of them, the tower's about 20 metres from houses. It's pretty undesirable, but we've got nothing that restricts that.
Well, I thought we did have in our planning scheme as a result of the one at Ormo many years ago. So there was, in my recollection, I thought it was added to our 2016 scheme, a distance. Yeah. Anyway, food for thought.
Well, this one's clear as mud. I thought this was going to be the simple thing going through. And I don't know where we're at now. Do we want to put this policy on hold? Do we want to cut out 6 and then come back and review it later? What's the consensus here? Councillor Wilkinson?
Thank you, Chair. I do believe that I think a bit of strategic assessment should actually be given towards things like the preclusion of sites. To me, that just seems like we're just spinning a wheel and putting our finger on it and saying that'll do. I feel like we need to have a bit more clarity around why we've chosen those particular sites, and I think taking into consideration things like safety elements and accessibility to using telecommunications from those locations should be a big part of that. And especially with, and again, I don't know where towers are located, and I'll just use Greenheart again. Certainly, Councillor Doran, if he's watching this back, I've got no intentions on doing anything bad at Greenheart. But it's just the point that I make. If there's towers that are around the proximity to that, do they give enough coverage to the site to begin with, or let alone when we open it up and then we've got hundreds of thousands of people potentially on site? Is there going to be future issues in that respect? So
I think you've raised a really good point, Councillor Wilkinson. My suggestion would be that we omit 6 from the policy for the moment, and the officers can bring back a recommendation on if there are some that want to be included as not supported. That's kind of where I'm sitting on that. I'll just get a sense of how people feel about that. Councillor Fowler, with regard to the thing about how close to people's houses, my take on that is that does belong more in the planning scheme than in a policy. But
I'm happy to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Gates just said it. I was just going to suggest a deferral on the telecommunications policy and just those considerations to be made and come back to a future GAF meeting.
Okay. So do we want to pick them out? So we'll say that we will defer the telephone. So to B, change B to defer the telecommunications leasing policy to a future GAF meeting, considering parkland locations and proximity to residential properties. Are they the 2 things we really want to consider? Councillor Martin?
If I could just add also the councillor involvement in that, to Councillor Gates's point, but also I was going to add to that earlier, but I'm pretty sure there's a consent as a landowner that a councillor needs to give. So just looking to firm up what is the role, what is the process for councillors in this ahead of the DA.
Is that all right? We don't need to add any more information. That you've got that. Okay. Great. Okay, so it's interesting with that one. So the intent behind both of these, well, particularly, with both of them was just to tidy them up. But what that does mean is that we're ending up adopting things that's in the existing, which we may not wish to adopt again. So I think that makes sense where we're at. Anything else? Okay, Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chair. Just wondering whether we needed to make mention of anything on the community leasing policy 6C, where it says options to renew are not offered. Do we need to make any change in that recommendation? We're adopting that policy today with that in there. What should we do in that instance?
I think we've got some feedback on that, do we?
Through the chair, as is with the way that we've actually proposed this particular policy, that's just reiterating the way that we currently operate now. It would be certainly my advice that if there's a willingness to actually change that we actually move that into the next review once we've completed the 2, the leasing review and the community facilities review, and bring that back then, so that we're actually not doing it without that research that sits behind it.
Okay, so I think that, because the question was, is it in there now? It is in there now, so we'll keep that. Councillor Martin?
Just a question on that particular item. The way I sort of read that is that we're not offering a 5-year lease with a 5-year option. It's not when a group is there for 10 years, we then won't give them another 10-year lease. It's just that we don't do leases with a fixed term and an option built into the lease. Have I got that right?
So, through the chair, the reason that these particular policies primarily exist in the first place is about complying with the Local Government Act in how we actually let the leases out and the procurement process that we actually follow in relation to those. I would prefer to come back and just confirm with you, and it's about actually whether or not we follow a process that goes by public tender to let these leases in the first instance, or whether or not we apply the exceptions under 236 of the regulations to avoid going through a public tender process. And it might be that as a general rule, we don't actually do that without getting the decision of council to apply the exception. So I'd prefer just to clarify that if I could, and come back to you before.
Councillor Gates.
Can I just clarify that I take that options to renew are not offered to mean we don't offer like a 5+5 or a 10+10. We do provide an option to renew to our community groups, but not through the original agreement. Is that what it means?
That's correct. That's how I understand it, and recall the conversations that we've had internally, and that's because of the way the Local Government Act requires us to apply those exceptions, which are by council decision. And a part of this process is actually putting in place a decision that allows us to apply those exceptions on an ongoing basis. So
well, I think once we all understand that, that's fine.
Yep.
The option, there's no option to renew. We understand that we do provide an ability for any of our clubs to release.
Correct.
But it's not built into the original contract with a 5+5 or a 10+10 or a 20+20.
The original offer in the lease agreement. Thanks.
Councillor Young.
Thanks, Chair. Given the intention with 1B to defer that, I think 1D should probably just be struck out at this point.
Through the chair, I'm comfortable with that at this point in time.
Who'd like to move this? Councillor Fowler, seconder. I'm happy to second it.
Chair, I think we've spoken about it quite enough today. But, this is a report to renew 2 of our policies that haven't been looked at in a considerable amount of time. So they were definitely due to be looked at and renewed. So, I think we're in a good place and look forward to the next round.
Yeah, thank you.
Anyone want to speak against? No. Happy to vote. All in favour? Thank you. Policy reviews. Easy as pie. Okay. We now go to 6.7, State Emergency SES Light Vehicle Uplift. I think we're having a short presentation.
We don't have a presentation. Just
any questions about this? Councillor Young.
Not a question as such, but I'd never realised that we had this MOU whereby we buy the vehicles and maintain them. It's really interesting, whereby, for example, rural fire brigades, we have a levy to facilitate that provision of support. And of note, there's been a request from the fire brigades recently to not only support the capital investment in the yellow trucks, the fire trucks, but also what they call the white trucks, which are very similar to these SES vehicles. And that's still out for debate and consideration. But whilst I've got the floor, I'd just like to express thanks to all the volunteer members of the SES. Just an amazing contribution they make for our community.
Good. Thank you. Anyone wish to move this? Councillor O'Neill, seconder. Councillor Martin. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor O'Neill?
Just very quickly, Chair. I mean, I think we all appreciate what the SES volunteers do, and any way that we can help, I think we should. And it does appear like that this has been a long time coming, actually, replacement of these vehicles. So it's I think it's a very good outcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone eager to speak? Microphone, please. Sorry.
We should have given them some of our surplus cars.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's the 6 of them.
That's real power. She thinks of nothing.
That's amazing.
Okay.
I clearly
you can even vote for it now. All in favour. Thank you. Okay.
Why you're in a generous mood.
Okay, excellent. So, blending our vehicles. So our light vehicles for community organisations initiative, we have had a lot of interest in this, and the officers have been working through a appropriate criteria to identify where they should go. This is an open item, but I do think that there are some specific questions about specific applicants, and in that case, I'm advised that we would need to go into closed for budget reasons. But we can do the presentation now. Yeah.
Before we do that, I received an email today from the General Counsel about 3 previous declarations I'd made about people who have made application. All 3 of the relationships are non-current or ordinary membership. I won't go into them today, but I want to let you know that the General Counsel has written to me. I've responded to General Counsel. None of those organisations have any relationship beyond an ordinary membership.
Okay, thank you for letting us know. Would you like a presentation before we go into close and ask specific questions?
I think it'd be cool to know the process.
Okay, let's go. Thank you very much.
Chair, can I suggest, though, that we do go into close so that we can answer any questions as it relates to the budget? I think we should.
But we can do the presentation in open, right?
There's one, we have added another slide at the end.
Well, let's go into close for that.
Okay.
We'll try and do as much in open as we can.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just waiting for the presentation. Thank you, councillors and council officers, for having us here today to present on the Light Vehicles for Community Organisations initiative. The presentation is just a brief overview of the program as it was adopted, and then also the applications that were received during the expressions of interest that was open from October 1st to October 31st this year. So just a reminder that within the program, we resolved to make up to 50 light vehicles available for community organisation use under a 12-month agreement, whereby we, as the city, fund insurance, maintenance and registration, and the community organisation would fund the operational costs such as fuel, fines, unfair wear and tear, FBT incurred, and any parking fees associated with housing the vehicle. The initiative was aligned with the community grants process in a lot of ways, so that we're following a consistent methodology with this program. So I won't read through each of the assessment criteria, and again down the bottom the period in which the expressions of interest were open. This slide just talks through the eligibility. Again, this is in line with the existing community grants policy, and talks to which community organisations are considered eligible and which are considered not to be eligible. Of the 84 applications or expressions of interest that we received, all were deemed eligible based on this criteria. So again, we did receive 84 applications from community organisations during the 1 month expressions of interest period, requesting a total of 197 vehicles. Most of the organisations were focused on providing community services, and again, most of the organisations did have current access to vehicles, whether they be owned or volunteered arrangements. We'll just point out the largest number of vehicles requested was in the passenger vehicle space, which does lend well to the vehicles that we currently have available. I will highlight at this stage we do have a very limited number of vans available. We have flexibility in all 3 of the other categories, but we have an absolute cap of 8 vans available. So this one just talks to previous grants. So again, most of the applications, 68% or just over 2/3, had previously received a grant in the last 2 financial years, including this financial year. And 9 of those applicants have outstanding acquittals, which does not preclude them from receiving a vehicle. They just would need to finalise those acquittals before the vehicle was able to be provided. I do just want to point out that these are separate to overdue acquittals, which would make them ineligible. As mentioned at the start, they were all found to be eligible, so there was nobody with an overdue acquittal. This one just is a quick divisional overview. So the applications generally were well spread across the divisions. I assume that comment may be in regards to that one that says 62. I will just point out that one application requested 40 vehicles, so that skews the data for that one slightly. There also were 3 applications for a total of 4 vehicles by organisations that are based outside the Gold Coast LGA. This is in line with the community grants process, provided that they provide services within our LGA, but just something to be aware of. And there is some provisions within our vehicle use policy as to where vehicles can be housed. So when we are looking at those applications, we may just have to ensure they have somewhere to park the vehicle that's not in excess of 20 kilometres from our local government boundary area border. The next one is the one we want to go into closed for.
So, Chair, that's the end of the presentation.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions on that part of the presentation before we go into closed? No? Okay. So going into specifics of applicants, we do need to go into closed due to it involving the local government's budget. So Councillor Fowler moved that. Seconder, Councillor Martin, all in favour that we go into closed? Thank you very much. Okay. Streaming back on. Well, we've just been discussing Christmas has come early to the Governance Committee, and we are delighted. We did think that this idea was somewhat peculiar when it was first presented to us, but we are delighted that at this important time for so many of our community clubs, we can help them out with a light vehicle. So I am very happy to move this recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Martin. Would anyone like to speak to it? No? Okay. We look forward to all those organisations getting benefit from that. All in favour? Well, you do. Me and Councillor Martin. All in favour? Excellent. Done. Very good. So we are now going to a closed item 7.1. Are there any questions on this item which will require us to go into closed? Yes, okay. So this is pursuant to section 254J, we must go into closed because it refers to the local government budget. So I will move that we go into closed. Seconder, Councillor Fowler, all in favour? Okay, great. And we are in closed. Okay, we've been examining the budget of September. We have a recommendation on the screen moved by the Madam Acting Mayor and seconded by Councillor Fowler. Councillor Gates, would you like to speak to it?
Chairman, we only made one change as reflected on the screen. Other than that, I would simply like to support the report before us and thank the officers. The city's in strong shape, and despite the fact that we lost our CFO, things are moving ahead as usual, and so thank you to everyone involved in putting together this report.
Great, thank you. Anyone wish to speak against? All in favour? Carried. Okay. Now, I know everybody's been waiting a long time, but if you could give us 5 minutes. If we could just take a 5-minute break and then we'll come at 5:05, 6-minute break. Our next item is a closed session item. So let me just see, reasoning up there. So there will be a short presentation on it, so we will need to go into closed. The reason being that it relates to a commercial matter involving our local government. Move that we're going to close. Seconder, Councillor Curtis, all in favour. Thank you. We just had a comprehensive briefing on the Nerang site assessment. We have a recommendation on the screen. Who's moving that recommendation? Councillor Fowler, seconder Councillor O'Neill. Would you wish to speak to it, or?
Well, if you don't mind, thanks, Chair, and thanks, councillors. I know it's a very long day, and I just wanted to have a couple of minutes. Nerang's obviously a very important site, and its history is probably quite important. It was established as the Albert Shire Council headquarters many years ago, and it attracted a lot of businesses around, so there was planners and engineers and all that sort of stuff. So it had a real impact on the economic vitality of Nerang. And of course, over time, that's dissipated as council's moved its functions and services elsewhere, and the nature of work has changed, and those little offices don't exist so much. So the importance of Nerang Administration Centre to the economic vitality of Nerang is not as important now, but it's important in the psyche of the local community, who really value the fact that there's this big edifice there and that represents government, and it's something important to them. But really, the site's always been dislocated from the CBD. It doesn't work that well, and we've previously had a resolution last year, about 12 months ago, that we would look at replacing the Bicentennial Centre with a whole bunch of services and facilities as a community hub. So that's still being explored. What we've got in front of us now is a pathway to continue evaluations and examinations with reports coming back to us. I fully endorse it and support it. We've got lots of moving parts here, and ultimately I'm hoping that we'll be able to arrive at a decision that's really strong and demonstrates that we are committed to Nerang and its economy and its people. And I'm pretty sure we'll get there. As we've done with Miami, where we've identified a very tangible and attractive proposition in lieu of the Miami depot, and I think we need to arrive at that kind of outcome, whether it's on the Nerang administration site or within the CBD. There's opportunities for us there to explore, and indeed David and Chris are doing that. Anyway, I'll just leave it at that, given it's a long day. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Happy for that is closed. Councillor Fowler, all in favour? Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any general business?
Don't dare.
Oh, yeah, I've got 3 general business items. No, I don't. But if I may, just before we leave, so last committee meeting for the year, I remember we started this term with a 12-hour GAF meeting. So we had a pretty good introduction to it. I want to acknowledge the 2 EGMs, it takes 2 EGMs to run this committee, Paul and Susan, for your work in this. It's pretty amazing when you think about what they've had to do. Paul's been responsible for transformation and risk for this city, which has not been a small thing over the last 18 months. And Susan taking care of all the areas that she does, having a gun CFO, losing a gun CFO, and the like. And thank you also, Susan, who put me in touch with a mentor at the beginning of this process. So onwards and upwards in 25. Thank you, everybody. It's been a long day. Out of here. Cheers.